Morning all. Let's have a look at Levon Aronian, one of his key games, against Vallejo Pons, Francisco. So this was in round 3 when Armenia met the strong Spanish team. So the clash on board 1, Aronian 2816, Pons 2697. A very critical game. So playing white, d4 from Levon, and we saw knight f6. After c4 e6, and now Queen's Indian territory because knight f3 was played, b6. White now plays g3 to prepare to fianchetto the bishop here. Bishop b4 check, a very popular move in this position. Bishop d2. The dark square bishops came off. Now sometimes because of this, sometimes black's dark squares are a little bit weaker. That's something to note here about this dark square bishop exchange. But of course white's dark squares are weaker, so let's see who can get the better from this position. So bishop b7, bishop g2, and now both sides castle. So nothing radical so far. Black looks quite solid, but after d6 we start to see potential weakness of this pawn coming up, which maybe was a little bit unnecessary. After queen c2, black played what seems to be a logical looking move, but may be carrying some risk with it if it weakens this pawn significantly. Black played c5. The problem with this, if white can try and expose the weakness of d6 later, if there's ever c takes d4, this could be very unpleasant having this pawn here. Just from an engine point of view, was that actually from an engine point of view, was it one of the better moves to play c5? Yes, maybe it is even theoretical, so this might not be the problem right now. It does get a grip on the position and stops white from playing things like c5 at the right moment. Okay, so c5, and then we saw rook d1. Okay, it looks a fairly standard, bog standard position with nothing much going on at the moment. But now we see c takes d4, which further exposes this d6 pawn as a potential vulnerability. I'm just curious here if this might have been a bit too early, or was it kind of almost forced? Because if black doesn't play cd, there might be an unpleasant idea for white to play d5 and then knight h4. Let's just try and show that. So c takes d4 in the game continuation. You can see a tiny spark of white advantage here, which might be highlighting that this is vulnerable in some variations. Knight takes d4, and then the bishops come off, and it looks as though virtually nothing's going on, but this pawn is a little bit weaker. Here a6 is mentioned, and in the game queen c8, that might be an important moment as well. So for the moment, it looks again as though we've had the dark square bishop's been exchanged off, the light square bishop's been exchanged off, and structurally the big thing to note is the d6 pawn here, the backward d6 pawn, and it seems as though a6 was mentioned by an engine to maybe stop knight b5s, but in the game queen c8 also looks kind of logical to get onto this diagonal. Knight d2, and now a6 was played to stop knight b5s, and maybe also later prepare b5 at the right moment. Knight 4 to f3, and now queen c6 looks logical again, and it looks as though black hasn't got an issue now, because he's also secured against apparently knight e4 by playing queen c6. So I'm just wondering about this now. Rook ac1, knight bd7. If this is actually now better for white after white's next move, which is quite surprising, but very positionally it seems a strong move. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. The basis of the move is to try and exploit d6. So if I give you 10 seconds starting now, I wonder if you can see it. Okay, white plays G4, surprisingly. The point, I believe, is knight takes G4, white can play Queen E4, forcing black's response to take on E4, and then this is unpleasant now to get a centre pawn for the flank pawn. So I do wonder, first of all, is this actually one of the strongest moves in the position? G4 here. Not actually even mentioned at the moment. Okay, interestingly, if I increase the number of lines, G4's out of the engine radar. We play it on the board. Maybe black's best response apparently was something like H6 or knight E5. Okay, that's probably why other moves. Okay, but now that it was presented to the engine, funny enough, it's changing its tune as though G4 is a good move. There, it's come onto the scene here. So let's just look at that variation, just to show that white would have an advantage here on Queen E4. Okay, a better move just protecting the queen maybe. Instead of Queen E4, there's knight DE5 as well. So it takes knight E4. Still, that D6 pawn is vulnerable now. White would have a small advantage, but bigger than earlier. So in the game, okay, we saw knight E5, yeah, G5, and that looks as though it's potentially weakening. And now knight H5 was played here, giving white Queen E4. Apparently, knight takes F3 might have been stronger. And I'm not really sure. I'm not convinced totally of the concept now. If the engine doesn't like it here, this F4, these double pawns, in particular this F4 control, maybe as compensation for this D6 pawn. This sort of position doesn't look that convincing, as though white's really in control. Actually, it's an interesting concept anyway that Levon's used here, but in the game it seemed to work out nicely because black actually played knight H5 immediately, and then with the queens coming off, it's kind of different to what we've just seen there, where in fact now in this game continuation, black's D6 pawn is being lost. Black plays D5, and okay, you might not think it's such a big deal, this position, and for the moment black can still defend, you might think, but I think the point is, if black tries to play rook D8 here, then there's rook D4, and then D5 will drop. Let's just make sure of that. Rook D4, and there's a small positional advantage built up in this position. It's just trying to get that small edge. So in this position, F6 was played, and now that centre pawn finally drops. So the strategy of G4 would seem to be a success here, and we've reached this rook and pawn ending now. So is white really winning this? Okay, after F takes G5, it's equal on pawns, with white having double pawns and black having double pawns here, but white is the first to infiltrate on the 7th rank and immediately threatens doubling, and that would be devastation. So black has to challenge that rook immediately. White takes, and now not takes on G5, but plays rook D7 check. And if the king ventures forward, then there's check here. If king E6, then he's going to lose G7, and there'll be a double attack on these two. So it goes back, and now rook B7. And it's just annoying that the whole opening was used to get a slightly annoying for black, an inferior endgame without much counterplay. Black plays B5, and now rook B6, and that, you know, the rook, which hasn't moved, is tied down to A6 at the moment, but it lets A6 go. A6 doesn't have to be taken though. Instead, perhaps a much stronger move, B4, is played here. And we have a situation now where black is not going to get one of white's pawns, but white is going to win one of these pawns now. The rook heads back just to protect a6 rather meekly, and it's a horrible position to play now. a3, king f7. Now this king comes out aggressively, and there's an idea just to undouble the pawns with f4 now on the cards after h6 f4, and this is going to make the king more aggressive when it comes out. So the king's getting more aggressive, and now the rook finally decides to sack that a6 pawn. It's not going to defend that anymore. Comes to c2. Okay, is this justified now, holding the f4 pawn for a bit? Well, h4 is played now, and if white is allowed h5, then that's quite a bind on these two pawns. But maybe even h5 is not entirely necessary. Black played g5, offering h6. It's a tricky position, this rook and pawn ending. Let's see from an engine point of view what is the idea of h4. Is it actually h5 or something else? Say rook a2 was played instead of g5. Okay, h5, check, rook b7, offering a3. This kind of rook and pawn ending is unpleasant for black. Okay, but you know, it might be possible. A lot of rook and pawn endings, it's often possible to draw them pawn down, but here we've got a powerful outside pass pawn, so maybe this is potentially winning for white, practically anyway. So after h4, g5 offering h6 actually did seem to extend white's advantage a bit, and that was taken here. Rook c3 check, king e4, and black took on h4, and we're ending up with a bigger advantage for white in this rook and pawn ending than before. So a pawn up here, and now after rook f5, it's looking pretty bad actually. 2 pawns up, and here black actually resigns. It's going to be 2 pawns down. So really, I think it's beyond drawing here. So okay, so it's a neat positional game, kind of profoundly neat. But was this g4 slightly controversial? That's one question raised. So winning that centre pawn, getting more active rooks, then one more active rook as one of the pairs of rooks got exchanged off. So yeah, you could say, you know, it's a bit of a dull game, but it's kind of profound at the same time. This game, just this transition into a slightly favourable rook and pawn ending. But g4, yeah, it looks as though maybe there's a more accurate way for black to have played this after g5 with the idea of knight takes f3 apparently. So knight takes f3 here instead of knight h5 is interesting. So knight h5 allowed queen e4, and this position where, okay, maybe it looks as though for a moment, you know, black's defending that d pawn by pushing it forward, but it's losing. Black's losing that d pawn here because of this rook d4 idea. So he did try, you know, f6, and so a slightly more favourable rook and pawn ending is translated now. This more active rook and more active king coming up. So I think f4, getting a more active king. Finally, black decides to go for it with the rook to try and tie the white king down. And in this g5, which might be slightly questionable, maybe there was more accurate move at black's disposal. But g5 dropping h6. But this pawn chain is being dismantled here, and white is ending up just material up in this rook and pawn ending. Okay, so think Black resigned after King F4. It's quite a profound game, this, a very important game, and it let Armenia beat Spain in round 3. So the full results on the 4 boards there: Aronian had won against Pons there. Movsian, a 2-6-9-8 Armenian, he drew with Ivan Salgado Lopez on board 2. Gabriel Sagazin, 2-6-9-3 for Armenia, drew with Miguel Escales Cordoba. And on 4, Tigran Petrosian, a 2-6-6-1, named after the classic Armenian grandmaster Tigran Petrosian. He drew with, on board 4, Oleg Korniev. So this was the decisive game on board 1 for Armenia versus Spain on the 30th of August. And it puts Armenia right up there on the pairings to play the top-seeded Ukrainian team coming up very soon. So that should be a fantastic match. I think Aronian is heading to play Ivanchuk. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks so much.